the First Minister, Senedd, could lose not only her job as First Minister, but also could lose her seat. Does that sort of make your stomach churn?
Well, I think if Reform get the largest number of votes, but they don't have the First Minister, it will once again cause people to feel aggrieved about the actual voting system.
They owned the stage really quickly. They got Salmond in a helicopter, flew him to, outside Holyrood, had him standing there just declaring that he had won. He was the biggest party.
Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Harriet Harman.
And me, Ruth Davidson.
And it's safe to say it's been a marathon week. Do you see what I did there? For both me and the Prime Minister. I'm not sure who's sorer at the moment, who's endured a more set of bruising moments, whose toenails have fallen off or heads fallen off, who knows? Because the speculation is, can he make it to the finish line? Post these May elections, I did make it to the finish line. I'm delighted. In fact, I wanted to bring my medal in today because I only got to wear it on Sunday, and then I thought it would be a bit over the top to just wear it all week, which is what I want to do. And then I thought, I can wear it for the pod. You two would allow this. You would celebrate it.
Yeah.
And then I forgot it. So I haven't even got my medal.
Disaster. Oh, we would so have loved to have seen your medal. We're going to do a deep dive on Wales today. So we've got plenty coming up. As much as I would love to keep talking about the marathon, Luke Tryl, the pollster, is back. He's from Moore in Common. He's been talking to people from the south to the north, to the valleys, to everywhere in between. And we're going to give you a real deep dive on what's happening in the Senedd elections.
Welcome to the show, Luke.
Great to be here.
You're looking very parky for a man that's been very busy focus grouping various voters on elections.
Yeah, no, I get a lot of energy out of people. In fact, I was in North Berwick last week where I met the Ruth fan club, it's fair to say, in North Berwick.
It's a lovely part of the world.
But we're not talking about Scotland today, although we do love talking about Scotland. We're talking about Wales. And let's start with a bit of the basic stuff, because one thing that's gone under the radar for some is the fact that the voting system has changed in Wales. And we have a voice note to explain a little bit about that, because I struggled to do this. No. Laura McAllister, because she knows a lot more about it than I do. She's the Professor of Public Policy and the Governance of Wales at Cardiff University. Let's let Laura explain to us what's going on.
We have significant changes to the architecture of the Senedd and devolution itself, with an expansion to 96 members from 60, so a 60% increase. And the rationale for that was very much around improving scrutiny, because it was very clear by any international standards and by hard evidence that there was insufficient resource to actually scrutinise government and other agencies properly. We have a new electoral system, so closed list proportional representation, a system that was favoured by nobody when I led the expert panel on Assembly electoral reform back in 2017. We've ended up with that system based on a kind of coalition of negativity, I'd say, within Welsh Labour, and a deal with Plaid Cymru, which meant that Senedd enlargement was contingent on agreement that they would go for that voting system. The arithmetic of it is interesting and potentially problematic, because it's counted through the D'Hondt system. D'Hondt favours the larger parties. And of course, D'Hondt does punish the parties that can't reach the threshold of anything between 12 and 15%. And even at its best, it looks at the moment like Labour's polling around the 12 to 16%. So it's be careful what you wish for, really, in terms of how seats are allocated from the D'Hondt closed list PR system.
I just pitch in there first to say, I think there's a real problem with these voting systems. I mean, people don't know what D'Hondt is. They can't even spell it. There's a different voting system in Wales than there is in Scotland, than there is in councils, that there is from the general election. And I think basically people are entitled to have an electoral system that they can actually understand. And I think it's part of dampening turnout that people don't really feel like they know how to vote or how their vote's going to be counted.
I mean, certainly from doing focus groups across Wales, no one understands this system. I mean, it is like genuinely you would do focus groups, not even one person would be able to explain. People thought it was still the old system. They were talking about having, different votes for different areas. I think the Welsh government has done a poor job of explaining explaining the change. But as you say, because there are so many different systems, it's hard for the public who don't follow this stuff like we do to keep track.
Well, Laura McAllister, who is the expert on this, clearly does not like the system either. I mean, she couldn't have been more scathing in a kind of professorial way. But Luke, do you agree with her assessment there? She says, does the new system, when she argues that the new system not only hurts smaller parties, but it could actually hurt Labour, could backfire?
Oh, no, it could very definitely backfire. And when we've done our modelling, Labour is at a tipping point for lots of those last seats. So very small margins could make the difference between Labour being probably a reasonable third through to being a much smaller party. So yeah, absolutely. And there is a danger that system magnifies this as applied reform split. Not least as well because you do also have that Caerphilly effect. You've still got people thinking, well, Plaid is the best vehicle to stop reform.
And look, let's go to big picture on Wales, Luke, because obviously ever since the Senedd was created, since devolution came to Wales, it has run red. It's been a Labour-controlled Senedd. Wales has always been run by Labour administrations. That could all be about to change. I mean, Nigel Farage, when I did that interview with him a few weeks ago, was talking very clearly about how they were going to take out Labour in some of those old mining towns, those traditional Labour strongholds. What's it looking like? Is it really going to be nasty for Labour?
Oh, I think it is going to be a very bad result. That's one thing I do feel confident in saying. And I think Labour have been really hurt by that double incumbency factor. The fact that they're in power in Westminster, they're in power in Cardiff Bay. And when you've got a time for change mood, when you ask people in Wales, it's around 70% time for change. It's really hard to push back against those headwinds. And there is, on some projections, the First Minister is losing her seat. It is going to be seismic. But what I also think is interesting is when you chat to people who are voting for Plaid, it's very different to chatting to SNP supporters. It is that kind of... So chat to SNP supporters and the constitutional question is often front and centre. Chat to Plaid supporters and it's much more... I don't mean this dismissively. I actually think it's quite a good thing for a party. It's more of a change vibe. They're going to do something different for Wales. They're going to stand up for Wales. That they're... people say things like everyone knows a Plaid candidate. And so it is different. But... the flip side is this system makes it very hard for any party to get a majority.
Right,
If you look across projections, it looks hard to see any viable way for Plaid to get in without relying on Labour.
Okay.
So are people going to get that change? If it's Plaid propped up by Labour, how different is it going to be?
Quite recently, in the part of the election campaign in Scotland, you had John Swinney, who's the SNP First Minister of Scotland, coming out saying that, after these elections, he was going to work with Rhonab Bioraith when Plaid win in Wales. He's going to work with Sinn Féin, who are already the largest party and a part of the coalition in Stormont, to break up Britain. And what was really, really interesting was actually you heard nothing from Sinn Féin and nothing from Plaid to come in off the back of that and to back him up on it. And there was a time where, Nicola Sturgeon with previous Plaid leaders was very close and they would do joint stuff together and you would see them do things together and they would try and magnify themselves. Quite often they would do stuff in London together to magnify it back out into Wales and Scotland. And there was almost a sense that in Scotland, the SNP has to talk up independence because independence is more popular than the SNP party. And that gives them the biggest caravan of votes. Whereas actually in Wales, my sense of it as from being outside of Wales is that if you slightly dampen down that, but talk up being strong for Wales, but not talk up breaking up the United Kingdom, that's how you build a bigger caravan of voters. Like that's how you, that's where your happy hunting ground is. And it is a different nuance.
Absolutely that. It's just a totally different tenor of conversations. And you ask people in Wales, do you think Wales is ready for independence? And, even people voting for Plaid say, not really, but we'd like to be a bit more like Scotland and have a bit more of our own independent voice, have a bit more power, have something a little bit different. And I think that's the sort of kernel of it for lots of Welsh voters. It's just wanting to, and a feeling that Wales, one of the things which struck me doing recent Welsh focus groups was how often HS2 came up as a sign of neglect of Wales. The fact that it was billed as being something good for Wales, and people would say in focus groups, yeah, but not 1 inch of track is actually being laid in Wales. So just this sense of not getting their fair deal from Westminster. And interestingly, saying, but we used to get loads of money from the EU. And that kept coming up with Plaid voters because, of course, there are lots of projects in Wales which have EU funding, like the Head of the Valleys Road there. So it's just this sense of not getting a fair share, and maybe Plaid will help us get that.
Interesting. I mean, the other thing that I find fascinating about Wales is that certainly at the turn of the year, the big story about the Senedd elections was kind of the rise of reform. And there was lots of chatter, wasn't there, about whether or not reform would take control of the Senedd. And actually, Farage sort of did say to me in an interview we did recently that they thought they were going to come out on top in Wales. What's happened to reform in Wales? Has the kind of momentum slightly slowed? Has Plaid come and eaten a bit of their lunch? Like what's going on there?
So I think there's a couple of things. And look, there is still a good chance that Reform do top the vote, but it will be very hard for them to form a government because of who would work with them to do that. But in my latest focus groups in Wales, it was a couple of things. The momentum did seem to have slightly come out of Reform in Wales. I think in Wales, the ex-Tory charge hurts them much more than it does in England from talking to people, because the Tories have never been that popular. In most of Wales, although in some parts they have. So I think that's part of it. And the Trump factor seemed to really hit home in Wales as well. This sense of, oh gosh, we've seen what happens, when Farage's friend is elected in the US. We don't want that for Wales. So I think that combo, and Plaid positioning themselves as that change vector as well. That said, I still expect Reform to do very well in Wales, but I think they're a little bit down off their peak.
I mean, Harriet, what about Labour in Wales? Because Wales has always been a place that had such a strong identity with Labour. Like when you hear Luke saying that the First Minister, Senedd, could lose not only her job as First Minister, but also could lose her seat. Does that sort of make your stomach churn a bit?
I think it would be devastating for Labour people in Wales, not least because Welsh Labour is so much part of Labour history.
Yes.
It's emblematic. But I remember European elections when the popular vote was won by the Tories in Wales. And I remember when whole swathes of North Wales, we didn't have any Labour MPs. So it's very deep in our hearts as part of our heritage, but sometimes the voters haven't gone along with that. And I think it's very interesting, your suggestion that, Luke, that even if Reform are the largest party in the terms of the number of members of the Senedd they get, that they won't necessarily control the administration because there will be an alliance of non-Reform members of the Welsh with the Senedd against them, and that will be what you're suggesting is a Plaid-led government in a coalition with Labour.
Yeah, across the models, it's really hard to see how Reform get enough, given the only people who haven't ruled out working with them, and I don't think they've said they would work with them, but only the Welsh Tories have not ruled out working with them. And, if you look across the projections, Welsh Tories are barely on the field now. So it's just really hard. So you're looking at some combo of, is it a minority government? And I think it's really interesting. Plaid have said that's their preferred option. I think precisely because they want to say we are change, and they know that if they hint they might go in with Labour, it would ruin that or dampen that change edge. Or Plaid Labour, or there's an outside world, if everything went right for Plaid and the Greens, that it could be a Plaid Green coalition.
Is there a legitimacy question here, though, that if Reform come out as the winning the most votes, being the biggest, coming first in the voting system, and yet the party that got the biggest vote share ends up not running the government? Isn't there a kind of a bit of a legitimacy question? I can see that being quite loud, noisy politics, right?
I think there is, and I think a lot of reform supporters, again, from talking to Wales, will feel quite aggrieved if that is the case. There's a world in which, Nigel Farage, that outcome might actually be optimal, because you can say, we've done the well, but we don't have to do the governing ahead of the general election. And of course, there is precedent for a party which came ahead in the popular vote, but well short of a majority, which is the SNP in Scotland in 2007, when there was still, and Ruth will correct me if I'm wrong, there was still a unionist majority in the Scottish Parliament when the SNP took power, and I think they had one more seat than Labour, and they went on to run it. So I don't think we've had a situation before where the largest party in any of the parliaments hasn't gone on to provide the First Minister there. So it would be uncharted territory.
I think in terms of what the public will wear, they do get used to stuff pretty quickly. They got used to a Tory Lib Dem coalition pretty quickly. If you look over in Ireland, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael have been knocking lumps out of each other for years. 2020, they went in with the Greens as well to form a grand coalition to keep Sinn Féin out. So I think people will wear it. And in terms of the election that you talk about, Luke, in 2007, it was an SNP minority. And it was just that kind of single seat, but they owned the stage really quickly. They got Salmond in a helicopter, flew him to, outside Holyrood, had him standing there just declaring that he had won. He was the biggest party. And even if Labour had tried to kind of do another, because they'd been in coalition for the previous terms since the Parliament started with the Lib Dems, they were just like, no, it is convention. The biggest party can try to form a government, and they did, and they managed to keep the minority government working all the way through. All they needed in terms of constitutionally was to make sure that their budgets didn't fall. That's what would have triggered another election. But they got their budgets through, and therefore they had their 4 or 5. I can't remember which year term it was. We move them around sometimes in Scotland.
Well, I think if Reform get the largest number of votes, but they don't have the First Minister, it will once again cause people to feel aggrieved about the actual voting system. And the other thing about the voting system in Wales, this new voting system, so I think that messing about with the constitution like this is quite problematic and undermines people's confidence in democracy. So I agree with your point, Beth.
There's a question too, Harriet, about who is my MS? Who is my member of the Senate? Well, actually, we all have 6 of them now. I mean, under this new system, it's not like you have a constituency one and then some list ones as well, in the same way as you have in Scotland. So there is that question about that. And I think the thing that really surprised me looking at the polling in Wales, Luke, is that Ipsos, I think it was the pollster, that said that over half of people, so 52% of people, thought that they would be open to changing their mind about who to vote for. And for me, I mean, obviously, I'm a member of a political party, I've served in a political party, we're a bit different. But is that normal? Do people normally, this close to an election, say they're open to changing their mind?
It is unprecedented, but I think it is the trend as well. In fact, we were doing some work yesterday, actually, looking at kind of voter loyalty. And, our conclusion was that actually, voters have become much more promiscuous in there. They are much more willing to range across different parties. And you've got both within bloc changes, that is, Tory or Reform, Labour, Plaid or Green, and you've got the people that then flip between blocks as well. So you've got all of these different axes of competition emerging, which mean that it's even more important. Previously in electoral strategy, what did you care about? The median voter, and it was all about appealing to the median voter. Now you've also got to pay much more attention to your base to stop them from flitting to someone else who has a similar ideological position to you, and it makes for quite messy politics.
Luke, we'd love to carry on talking to you about Wales. We've run out of time, but thank you for coming on. I am so fascinated about the Welsh result. What time are we going to get it, do you think?
I think we're expecting about tea time on Friday.
Tea time on Friday. Make sure you put your Sky Telly box on because that is going to be one of these mega election moments, isn't it? Are you coming on Sky on the Friday, Luke?
I would love to come on
He
Sky
is now.
on Friday.
He is now. Thanks for coming
Thanks for
on.
having me.
Well, that's all from us today. We will be back a little bit later than usual next week, so thanks to those all-important elections. So we'll be bringing you the post-match analysis on a special Friday night edition of Electoral Dysfunction, so do keep an eye out for that. If you're following us wherever you get your podcasts, that will come straight into your feed as soon as it comes out, so make sure you hit that follow button.
Anyway, until then, goodbye.
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 Goodbye.